Some mountain ranges did not go quiet at night. They simply changed what the silence was for. Welcome to Black Pine Archives. In this episode, there were 9 disturbing case files from the Appalachian Mountains, assembled from partial records, lodge ledgers, trail registers, drone telemetry, bridge camera pulls, trail cam logs, dispatcher audio, thermal clips, and sheriff summaries. If you want more archived files like these, subscribe and stay to the end. One of these cases left a physical mark that should not have been possible. The lodge sat high enough that the air felt thinner the moment a car door opened. It was not a resort. It was a working mountain property that survived on weekend bookings, hunting season overflow, and families who wanted a clean bed without the city attached. The building wore its age honestly, dark timber rubbed pale by hands, a porch that flexed under weight, and a foyer that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old heat. The family arrived late after a drive that had turned from highway to switchbacks to a final gravel lane. Snacks and empty bottles rolled in the footwells. The children moved with that restless energy that came from being trapped in a car too long. The parents carried the quiet confidence of people who believed the reservation confirmation on their phone was the only truth that mattered. At the desk, the clerk followed habit. She asked for identification, slid a pen across the counter, and opened the check-in ledger, the way she always did, flat-palmed, spine creasing where it had been creased thousands of times. Her finger traveled down the current page, matching names to rooms, rooms to keys, keys to a drawer behind her. Her finger stopped. The reservation slip clipped to the ledger was printed in clean black text, dated for that night. The last name on it belonged to someone the county still listed as missing. The clerk did not say the name out loud. She did not need to. Her face changed in a way the father noticed immediately, the small tightening around the eyes that meant an employee had stepped out of customer service mode and into something personal. Reservation under missing person's name. From the lodge ledger, the missing person case was not an old ghost story. It was recent enough that people still argued about it at diners, still held small fundraisers, still checked the woods when a car was seen parked where it should not have been. The sheriff's office summary described it in blunt lines. Last known location, last known phone ping, no confirmed sightings, no recovered remains. Case still open. From the sheriff's summary, the family insisted they had booked under their own surname. The mother held up her phone, brightness turned high, confirmation email pulled up with the correct details. The clerk glanced at it, then back at the ledger, then back at the reservation slip clipped to the page. Her voice stayed neutral, but her hands moved faster than before, as if speed could make the problem less real. She checked the property system. The reservation line was there. The room was assigned. The payment authorization existed. The guest name on the screen was the missing person's name, spelled correctly, including the middle initial. The clerk attempted a correction the way she would have for any typo. She tapped the field, deleted letters, entered the family's name, and hit save. The system accepted it for half a second, then reverted back to the missing name as if the database had been overwritten by something with higher priority. The manager was called from the back office. He was a man who had dealt with broken boilers and drunk guests and storm outages. Someone who believed every problem could be stabilized by procedure. He asked for the reservation number. He asked for the email. He checked the booking website's interface. Everything pointed to the family's account. Then he looked down at the paper ledger and treated it like an object that had authority. He unclipped the slip and examined it under the desk lamp. The print was sharp. The edges were clean. The paper felt faintly damp, as if it had been handled with wet hands. He tore the ledger page out to photocopy it for records and to send to the sheriff. The paper resisted, fibers stretching in a way dry paper should not. The tear sounded wrong, soft and thick instead of crisp. When he finally freed the page, a wet fingerprint sat on the bottom margin, perfectly shaped, ridges intact. It looked like it had been placed there seconds earlier. No one at the desk had wet hands. No one had touched the bottom corner. The clerk placed the torn page on the counter like it might stain the wood. The family moved to the side, suddenly aware of their children's voices and the way those voices felt too loud in a building that had become quiet. The mother checked the room number again, as if the phone could correct the building. The father stared at the fingerprint until it seemed to stare back. Outside, the parking lot was lit by yellow bulbs that made the night feel close and small. Fog hung low enough to blur the tree line. The lodge windows looked warm, domestic, safe. The mountain air tasted like cold metal. The father called emergency services from beside their car. His voice stayed controlled, the way people tried to sound when they believed that sounding reasonable would keep the world reasonable. Caller reports matching signature. From the emergency call log, the dispatcher asked standard questions. The father answered them. The recording later showed something the family did not notice in the moment. A faint breath sound under the call, not the father's and not the wind, like a second mouth too close to the microphone. The dispatcher did not comment on it. The log flagged the call as unusual but not immediately actionable, then routed it to the on-duty deputy. The deputy arrived after midnight. He did not treat it like a ghost story. He treated it like identity fraud until the evidence refused that shape. He photographed the torn ledger page in place, under the desk lamp, using a small ruler for scale. He photographed the reservation slip clipped to it. He photographed the wet fingerprint. He photographed the screen that showed the missing name locked into the booking field. He bagged the torn page in an evidence sleeve. The paper inside fogged the plastic slightly, moisture still present. The deputy noted that in his report and moved on. He spoke briefly with the clerk and the manager, both of whom offered the same detail. The reservation had not been entered manually. It had appeared in the system as if it had been submitted from outside the property network, using correct credentials, correct formatting, correct timing. The manager described it as a transaction the lodge should not have been able to receive. The deputy drove the page to the county evidence locker before sunrise because something about leaving it at the lodge felt careless. By morning, the fingerprint had lifted clean in the lab, ridges intact, not smeared, not blurred. The signature matched archived examples closely enough that the lab refused to call it random. It also refused to call it verified. The phrasing in the report was careful, uncomfortable, built to survive scrutiny. The clerk went back to the lobby after the deputy left and checked the ledger again. The torn page was gone, but the binding seam still held the faint dampness of paper that had been wet. The reservation slip was no longer on the counter. Another had taken its place, clipped neatly with the same missing name, printed on it again as if the lodge itself had corrected the clerk's attempt to erase it. The family left before noon. They did not tour the grounds. They did not ask for a refund at the desk. They did not want keys. Days later, the father checked their bank account and saw that the card hold had posted and cleared. The merchant name was correct. The transaction amount matched the listed room rate. The timestamp was wrong by exactly 1 minute, as if the system could produce a charge, but could not align it perfectly with human time. The sheriff's office kept the case open under a category that sounded safe: suspected booking system anomaly, potential fraud attempt, evidence retained. The missing person file remained active. The lodge returned to normal business, but the clerk stopped touching the ledger with her bare fingers. She began turning pages with a pen, as if paper could carry something that did not wash off. And when she locked up at night, she started checking the guest name field on the computer one last time, not to confirm who was coming, but to see whose name wanted to arrive. Archival transition in the Appalachians. Paper often outlived people. In these files, paper did something else. It accepted them as reservations. The shelter existed for a simple reason. People misjudged distance in the mountains. Weather rolled in fast. Ankles turned. Headlamps died. The structure was no more than a box of rough boards and a tin roof anchored to stone, positioned just off the ridge trail where wind hit hard and visibility could collapse in minutes. Inside, there was the usual inventory of human leftovers. A nail with a register book hanging from it. A small table where hikers placed what they did not want to carry anymore. A stove that smelled faintly of old smoke. A broom with bristles worn down to a stub. The place was built to keep people alive, not comfortable. That was why the new rule felt wrong immediately. Rules at shelters were always about survival. Fires outside, food storage, leave no trash, keep noise down. This one was taped to the wall at eye level, written in block letters with a heavy marker, the strokes thick enough to show anger or urgency. Do not look at your own photos. 2 hikers reached the shelter near dusk, tired enough that their bodies moved on habit while their minds wandered. Their clothes were damp from mist. Their hands shook slightly from cold and exertion. They read the sign, exchanged the kind of look people exchanged when confronted with superstition, and laughed once, short and dry. Then they saw the stack of pictures on the table. They were printed photographs, not phone screens, not digital previews. Real paper, slightly curled at the corners, as if it had been warmed and cooled. The top image showed a section of ridge trail both hikers recognized. The background was correct. The same crooked pine, the same rock outcrop, the same strip of pale dirt where the path narrowed. The subject was a hiker in a bright jacket, head turned slightly, caught mid-step. The angle of the shot was wrong. It was taken from above and behind, from a position where no person could stand without being in the air or on a slope too steep to hold a body. The next photo was worse. It showed 2 hikers passing each other at a bend where the trail dipped between boulders. The boulders were real. The bend was real. The hikers were real enough to be identified by gear. Their faces were not. The faces were blurred in a way that did not resemble motion blur. It looked like the features had been removed after the fact, smeared into pale ovals as if a thumb had dragged across wet ink. But the rest of the image was sharp. The blur was selective, deliberate, and centered exactly where identity lived. The hikers did not touch the photos at first. They stood over them, reading the backs where someone had written names and dates in neat handwriting. The names were familiar, the kind of names that appeared in trail registers all the time, but some of them were dated with that day's date. One of the hikers found his own name on the back of a photo near the bottom of the stack. He lifted it carefully by the edges, telling himself it was a prank, a trail joke, a local tradition meant to scare newcomers. The jacket in the image was his. The posture was his. The pack had a distinctive patch his partner had sewn on the strap. His face was a pale blur, and behind him, the tree line looked subtly wrong, as if the image had captured the forest at a different time and layered it over the present. The shadows fell at an angle that did not match the dusk outside. A patch of sky in the corner held a faint, washed-out brightness, like midday trapped inside a night scene. He put the photo down immediately, breath caught in his throat. His partner read the rule on the wall again, slower this time, as if repetition could reveal a hidden instruction. They left the shelter without using it. They pushed on in the dark, headlamps cutting narrow tunnels through mist, moving faster than their bodies wanted because their minds insisted that staying near that table was an error. They reported it at the next trailhead where signal returned. A ranger met them the following morning. The ranger approached the shelter the way professionals approached uncertain scenes. He noted entrance conditions. He checked for trash and human tracks. He photographed the sign taped to the wall, then photographed the stack of photos where it sat. Printed photos found at shelter. From a ranger report, he expected to find a printer. He expected to find packaging or a battery pack, or at least the kind of trash people left when they carried something in and got tired of it. There was none. No plastic wrap, no torn paper corner, no empty ink cartridge, no smell of fuel from a portable generator. The paper stock was fresh and uniform, the kind used for small consumer printers. The ink smelled faintly chemical, like new receipts, a scent that lingered even in cold air. The shelter itself smelled of damp wood, old smoke, and something else that did not belong. A faint, warm plastic odor that rose when he leaned close to the stack. The site inspection report later reduced the most important detail into a simple sentence. No printer on site. From the site inspection, the ranger did what rangers did when something turned strange. He cross-checked. The register book hung from its nail, pages swollen slightly from humidity. He flipped back to recent entries, names, dates, party sizes, notes about weather and trail conditions. Nothing unusual at first. Then he found the match that made his posture stiffen. Several names written on the backs of the photos matched entries in the register. The handwriting was not identical, but the spelling was exact, including middle initials and punctuation that most people did not bother with on trail logs. A few of the names were marked in the register with small side notes that looked like they had been added later, almost like annotations. The review summary tried to stay neutral and factual. Trail register confirms names. From the trail register review, the ranger sealed the photos in an evidence sleeve and carried them out. He removed the taped rule from the wall and bagged it separately, preserving the tape and paper as if it were a note left at a crime scene. He returned 2 days later with another officer to look for footprints, to look for hidden gear, to look for any explanation that involved a human being. The taped rule was gone, not torn down and discarded on the floor, gone cleanly as if it had never been there. But the tape residue remained on the wall in 4 pale rectangles, sticky enough to catch dust and pine needles. The residue formed a perfect outline of where the paper had been. The table was bare. The shelter looked normal again, stripped of the only thing that had made it wrong. The second officer remarked on the smell before the ranger did. It was faint but distinct, like warm plastic cooling. Not smoke, not damp wood. Something modern, out of place, and briefly alive in the air. The ranger took photos of the tape residue. He noted the odor. He checked corners and floor gaps for any hidden stash of prints. There was none. He checked for a printer mark on the wood, a burn, a scuff, a melted spot. He found nothing. Back at the office, the evidence sleeve was examined under better light. The photos showed no printer brand watermark, no embedded code, no metadata because they were paper. The blurs over faces did not follow any known smear pattern. The distortion was too precise. In several shots, the blur appeared to slightly overlap objects behind the subject, as if the erasure had not only removed the face, but had interfered with the background. One photo contained a detail that none of the hikers had noticed at the shelter. At the edge of the frame, behind a blurred subject, a portion of the shelter's interior wall was visible, the same place where the rule had been taped. The angle implied the photo had been taken from inside the shelter looking out. The ranger filed it as a warning behavior. He used careful language. He avoided the word impossible. He did not need impossible. He had procedure. He recommended quietly and unofficially that hikers treat the shelter as compromised until further notice. The shelter remained open. The mountains did not accept closures easily. People kept using it. The register continued to fill with names and dates and notes about weather. Weeks later, a different ranger found a single printed photo on the same table. One image only. A hiker standing in the doorway of the shelter, head slightly tilted, face already blurred into white. On the back, in neat handwriting, was a message that was not a name. Do not look at your own photos. Archival transition in several Appalachian files, the evidence did not merely document events. It behaved like a warning that arrived early. The search team launched the drone from a bald ridge at first light, when the fog still clung to the lower hollows and the treetops looked like dark islands in a pale, moving sea. The missing subject had last pinged a locator beacon near a high saddle 2 ridgelines away, a place where hikers misjudged distance because every slope looked the same once the clouds dropped. The operation followed the kind of routine that was meant to keep panic from contaminating decisions. A printed checklist lay on the hood of the command truck. Batteries were counted and labeled. Propellers were inspected for hairline cracks. The operator logged the serial number, verified the compass calibration, and set the return to home altitude high enough to clear the ridgeline, but low enough to preserve battery. The camera timestamp was synced to the team's incident clock, the same clock used for radio logs and chain of custody forms. A line in the briefing notes described the plan with quiet confidence. Drone deployment authorized for grid sweep along the saddle and adjacent drainages. From the SAR briefing note, the operator, a volunteer named Dylan Mercer, did not treat the drone like a toy. He flew it the way he drove mountain roads, slow, deliberate, always assuming the next curve could hide something that would not move out of the way. He brought the drone up into a steady hover, checked stability, then pushed it out over the tree line toward the saddle. The telemetry looked normal. Battery draw was steady. Signal strength stayed strong. The map overlay showed the drone moving across open air at a consistent elevation, clearing the ridgeline in a clean arc as if it were following a line drawn by a ruler. Nothing in the numbers suggested a problem. Flight path normal. From the drone telemetry log, the team watched the live feed on a field monitor shaded by a jacket. At first, the camera showed exactly what everyone expected: rock, scrub pine, slick patches of lichen on ledges, and the pale ribbon of trail switching back through dead leaves. The drone passed over the saddle where the beacon had last pinged, and the feed showed only empty ground and wind-stirred brush. Then the image flickered. It was not the kind of flicker caused by signal loss or a failing micro SD card. It looked like a hard cut to a different scene, clean and immediate, as if someone had switched inputs. The mountains vanished. The camera now faced a ceiling close enough to touch. The sky became rough rock with hairline fractures filled by mineral streaks. Water dripped in slow intervals, each drop bright for a split second in the drone's light. Rusted rails ran along the floor, disappearing into darkness. A line of old timbers braced one wall at uneven angles, their surfaces swollen and blackened by damp. The air in the video appeared thick. The lens caught fine mist. The audio track, faint beneath the hum of the drone's motors, held something that sounded like distant ventilation, a low, steady breath that did not match any wind on the ridge. No one spoke. The team did what people did when their senses failed to match reality. They stared, searching for an explanation that would bring the image back into the world they were standing in. The live feed cut out after several seconds and returned to open air. The drone was still flying the same route on the telemetry map, still clearing treetops, still moving across the ridgeline exactly as planned. Dylan initiated a controlled return. He did not push the drone farther. He did not run another sweep. He brought it back the way professionals brought back anything that had started behaving outside known rules. The drone returned on schedule and landed gently on the flattened grass near the command truck. Its propellers were damp. The body was speckled with fine gray grit, the kind that looked like pulverized stone rather than road dust. When Dylan lifted it, he noticed the motors were warmer than they should have been for a flight conducted in cold air. One of the ground searchers leaned in and caught a faint smell on the drone's casing. Old rock, wet mineral, and something stale that carried the wrong kind of coolness, like air from a basement that had not been opened in years. The team removed the memory card the way evidence was removed in any field investigation, carefully with gloved fingers, into a labeled sleeve. Dylan wrote the date out in full on the chain of custody form. The time was recorded by the incident clock, not the device clock. Back at the staging area, they reviewed the footage on a laptop with a larger screen. The video did not show a brief glitch. It showed a sustained segment of underground recording, long enough to see details that should not have existed anywhere near that ridge. Rail joints with old bolts, a water stain shaped like a handprint on the rock, and a narrow passage branching off to the left, where a piece of reflective tape hung from a timber, new enough to catch the drone's light with a clean flash. The review note used restrained language, as if careful phrasing could keep the file from becoming something else. Video showed subterranean environment inconsistent with mapped flight conditions. From the footage review note, they paused the frame at the clearest image of the rails and tried to locate any mine or adit in the area that could explain it. Appalachia had plenty of abandoned workings, but this section of the ridge had been logged, hiked, and surveyed for decades. The county maintained records of known hazards and sealed entries. The mapping office replied within hours with a polite summary that read like a door closing. No mine entry at coordinates. From the county response, a second email followed with a technical addendum. The geology in that saddle, according to the county, did not support a void large enough for rails and timber braces. No registered mine, no archived claim, no sealed portal, no known collapse zone. The team tried the obvious explanations next, because the obvious explanations were what kept people alive. They checked for file corruption. They checked whether the video could have been overwritten by an older clip stored on the card. They checked for signs of tampering in the drone's firmware logs. A technician ran the raw file through checksum verification. The file matched the drone's internal record of what it had recorded during that flight. The metadata aligned with the exact window of time the telemetry said the drone was crossing the ridgeline. The timestamps, however, carried a detail that made the room go quiet again. The subterranean segment was off by exactly 1 minute from the incident clock. Not 5 minutes, not a rounding error. 1 minute, clean and consistent, as if time itself had been nudged sideways and then set back into place. A lab memo later summarized the conclusion without offering comfort. No evidence of post-recording alteration. Internal file integrity verified. From the lab verification memo, they bagged the memory card as evidence. They bagged the gray grit scraped gently from the drone's casing. They labeled the drone itself as equipment involved in an anomalous incident and grounded it, removing the battery and securing it in a locked storage case at the county facility. The missing subject was not found that day. Ground teams swept the saddle and drainages until dusk, moving through laurel thickets and slick rock shelves, looking for fabric, looking for blood, looking for anything that could turn uncertainty into a procedure. They found nothing that belonged to the missing hiker. 2 days later, a second drone was requested from a neighboring unit to continue aerial sweeps. The incident commander approved the request, but only after adding a new line to the checklist. All video to be reviewed in real time and archived immediately after each flight. The note did not mention mines. It mentioned discrepancies. The second drone flew 3 grid lines and returned with ordinary footage. Trees, ridge, nothing. The relief was brief. When the operator connected it to a laptop to copy files, a new folder appeared in the storage directory. The folder was labeled with a date that had not happened yet, written in the drone's own naming format, as if generated automatically. Inside the folder was a single still image. The image showed the command truck from behind. The hood was open. The printed checklist lay on the metal. Dylan stood beside the drone launch pad, head slightly bowed as if reading the telemetry screen. The angle was wrong for any camera positioned where the drone had been before takeoff. It looked like the shot had been taken from the far side of the ridge, above shoulder height, at a distance that would have required flight. The file's timestamp, written in words on the incident log afterward, placed it 1 day in the future and 1 minute out of alignment with the team's incident clock. The operator did not claim the drone had taken the image on its own. He did not use dramatic language. He simply noted that he had never captured that frame during the flight, and he had never pointed the camera back toward the staging area. The response was procedural because procedure was all they had. The folder was copied. The files were bagged. The drone was grounded. The incident commander notified the county, which filed the notification as an equipment anomaly connected to an active missing person case. The missing subject was never recovered. Weeks later, when the original drone was inspected for maintenance, the technician noted a final detail that did not fit with any normal hardware issue. The drone's internal storage contained another empty folder labeled with a future date. The folder held no files, only a system-created index entry, as if the device had prepared space for footage it expected to record. And on the printed maintenance form, in the margin where technicians sometimes wrote personal notes, someone had penciled a single sentence that was not part of any checklist. Unit behaved as if it had flown somewhere the map did not include. From the maintenance margin, note archival transition in Appalachia. The ground was older than the roads. In these files, the ground also appeared to be listening. In daylight, the bridge looked harmless. A 2-lane span laid across a narrow gorge, where the creek ran thin and fast between shale walls. Steel guardrails lined both sides. A pair of county cameras watched the approaches for ice and accidents. On tourist maps, it was not marked as anything special. Locals used it because it saved time. At night, it became a place where documentation stopped working in a specific, repeatable way. The first report came from a man named Harold Cressman, a hardware store manager who drove home after closing on a cold weeknight in late autumn. He noticed a vehicle behind him too close for comfort, its headlights steady and pale, not swerving, not passing, not falling back. At the bridge approach, Harold glanced into his rearview mirror and tried to read the plate out of habit, the way drivers did when they wanted to reassure themselves they could identify a threat if needed. He could not make out a single character. The plate looked normal in shape, mounted where it should have been, but the reflective surface threw back only a flat whiteness. He crossed, held his lane, and did not brake. The vehicle stayed behind him at the same distance as if it were paced to his speed. At home, Harold did what anxious people did when the fear came with a concrete detail. He opened the county's public camera portal and pulled footage from the south approach and the bridge midspan. He expected to prove to himself that it had been a trick of light. The footage did the opposite. The following vehicle was there. The headlights were there. The outline of the bumper and grille was there. The plate area was a smooth white blur, as if someone had painted over the pixels with a clean brush. The blur did not spill onto the bumper. It did not affect the road. It sat in a perfect rectangle, anchored exactly where the plate should have been. Plates unreadable at bridge. From the camera poll summary, a deputy contacted the county technician the next morning. The technician's first explanation was the obvious one. infrared flare. Many traffic cameras used infrared illumination at night, and reflective plates could blow out under certain angles. The assessment was written in careful, neutral terms, but the file included details that made it difficult to dismiss. The overexposure appeared only in one zone, only at the bridge midspan, and only for certain vehicles. Cars entering the bridge recorded normally. Cars leaving recorded normally. Within the center third of the span, the same plate could turn into blank whiteness, then return to normal as if a line had been crossed. Infrared glare anomaly localized. From the technical assessment, the county ran comparisons. They checked weather. They checked maintenance logs. They checked camera firmware updates. Nothing had changed. The cameras did not show a dead pixel block or a smear that remained on every frame. The blur appeared only when a plate entered the central zone. During the following 2 weeks, emergency call logs began to show a pattern. Drivers described close following, vehicles that lingered in the mirror, and plates they could not capture on their phones while the bridge was centered in the frame. Several callers described the same contradiction. The plate looked readable to the naked eye, but it turned blank on video. One caller had attempted to film a tailgating pickup at the north approach. The phone video showed the truck clearly until the bridge railing entered frame. As the camera angle adjusted to include the span, the plate disappeared into a bright, featureless rectangle. When the caller lowered the phone to look directly, the plate returned, letters visible under the headlights. Multiple reports, same location. From emergency call records say, a deputy named Mallory Quinn was assigned to run a controlled test because she had the patience for repeatable, boring work, and because she did not like mysteries that left no paperwork. She chose a dry night with minimal wind. She checked her cruiser's dash cam settings and verified the camera timestamp against her watch. She parked on the south approach and filmed her own plate with her phone from 3 angles. The footage showed crisp letters and a clean, reflective sheen. Then she drove onto the bridge at a steady speed and narrated only in her head, counting distance markers she had memorized from previous calls. She did not use the radio. She did not speed. She watched the dashcam status light in her peripheral vision. When she pulled the footage later, the result was unnerving in its precision. At the south approach, her rear plate was readable. At the first expansion joint on the bridge deck, it began to wash out. At midspan, it was a perfect white rectangle with no trace of characters. At the far expansion joint, the characters returned sharply, as if revealed by a switch. She wrote it up as a verified anomaly and prepared to run a second pass in the opposite direction for consistency. On the second crossing, the dash cam did not blur the plate. It did something else. The bridge looked empty. The footage showed her headlights cutting across steel rails and wet pavement. It showed the gorge as a black gap beyond the guardrail. It showed her speed, steady, but it did not show the expected reflective signage near midspan. It did not show the faint red tail lights of an oncoming car that she remembered passing. It did not show the shape of her own reflection in the side mirror when she glanced toward the railing. It was as if the camera had recorded a bridge with fewer details than the bridge she had actually driven across. When she reviewed frame by frame, she found a specific moment where the image held steady, but the sound did not. For several seconds, beneath the engine noise and tire hum, there was a low, steady exhale. It was not her ventilation system. It was not the wind, which would have risen and fallen with the open span. It sounded like breath held close to a microphone, controlled and patient. Mallory documented the audio as an unexplained artifact and submitted the clip as part of the evidence packet. She also noted a detail that had been easy to overlook until she watched the footage too many times. At midspan, on the first crossing, the plate blur did not appear gradually from light bloom. It arrived at the exact edge of a frame, clean and immediate. as if activated by position rather than by illumination. A week later, the county technician returned at night with a portable infrared meter and a calibration board. He tested the cameras and found no abnormal output. The cameras projected a normal infrared pattern. The plates still vanished only in the midspan zone. The technician tried a different plate, a temporary tag on a borrowed vehicle with a non-reflective surface. On the bridge, the camera did not wash it out. The numbers remained visible. Then, on the next run, the non-reflective tag became unreadable in a different way. The image did not blur. It sharpened too much. The tag area became a blank rectangle of perfect darkness, like a cutout where detail refused to render. The evidence packet grew thicker. Camera pulls, dash cam files, emergency call summaries, technician notes. And then the problem expanded beyond plates. Several drivers reported that their faces were slightly wrong on video while on the bridge. Skin too smooth, eyes too bright, like compression artifacts that should not have occurred on a stable feed. Those reports were not included in the official summary. They appeared only in handwritten margins and in one dispatch note that never made it into the final database. A month after Harold's report, a state trooper stopped at the bridge during a routine patrol and filmed a short segment for his own records. His dash cam recorded his cruiser at the south approach. It recorded his plate clearly. It recorded the bridge deck. At mid-span, it recorded the plate as a white rectangle. And in the guardrail reflection for 3 frames, there was a second plate-shaped rectangle behind his vehicle, pale and bright, as if a vehicle were following close. No headlights appeared behind him. No engine was audible. The road behind him in the video remained empty. He wrote a single line in his shift notes and did not elaborate further. Camera integrity impacted within bridge center span. Cause undetermined. From the patrol, Note County Maintenance inspected the bridge for physical tampering. They found none. No added wiring, no hidden devices, no signs of new equipment. They did find a small scuff on the steel rail at midspan, a mark that looked like a repeated touch in the same place, polished by friction. The scuff sat at the height of a license plate. That detail would have remained meaningless if it had not matched a phrase that later appeared in an unrelated call log from deeper in the mountains, the kind of call that mentioned a voice repeating itself and a timestamp wrong by 1 minute. In that call, a dispatcher wrote that the subject described the road as if it had learned how to look back. At the bridge, the thing that learned did not remove vehicles. It removed identifiers. It left headlights, shapes, motion, and sound. And it erased the one detail that let humans say, with certainty, this belonged to someone and someone could be held accountable. Archival transition. When documentation failed, witnesses became evidence. When witnesses failed, only patterns remained. The trail camera belonged to a man named Everett Sloan, a quiet landowner who managed a few dozen acres on the edge of a long Appalachian hollow. He did not hunt much anymore, but he still watched the woods the way people watched weather. He tracked deer movement for the sake of his garden fence, and he tracked trespassers because his property line backed into public land where hikers sometimes drifted off trail. Everett mounted the unit at chest height on a poplar, facing a narrow game path that ran between 2 laurel thickets. He set it the way the manual recommended: motion trigger on, audio on, time stamp on, infrared at night. He tested it by walking past once, then twice, confirming that the frame caught him clean and centered. For the first few weeks, the camera behaved like a camera. It recorded deer at dusk, raccoons at night, a single black bear that moved like a shadow with weight. Then, in early autumn, it began triggering every night at the same time. Not around the same time, not within a range. The same minute, night after night, with the neatness of a scheduled task. Everett noticed because the notification pattern on his phone became predictable. He could set his coffee down, glance at the clock, and wait for the alert. The timestamp on the clips stayed consistent. Too consistent for wind, too consistent for animals. 2:13 a.m., 2:13 a.m., 2:13 a.m. He opened the footage expecting to finally see a poacher, or at least a coyote with an odd habit. The clips were empty. The infrared showed the same corridor of leaves and darkness, the same thin branch hanging from the left edge, the same pale rock at the bottom right corner. No eyeshine, no passing body, no near-field blur from a moth. The unit had triggered on nothing and done it with discipline. Trigger schedule repeats nightly. From the camera event log, Everett did what people did when the woods behaved wrong. He tried to make it mechanical. He checked the straps and the mount, making sure the camera was not shifting at night and confusing its own sensor. He trimmed the branch that hung into frame. He wiped the lens. He adjusted sensitivity down, then up. He moved the camera 2 feet to the right to change the background pattern. The next night at 2:13 a.m., it triggered again. The clip was still empty. He started scrolling backward through the week, watching each night's file in sequence. The frame barely changed, but the audio did. It held a faint hiss of nocturnal insects and the occasional drip of water off leaves. And beneath that, there were moments that did not belong. A soft pressure sound, as if something heavy had stepped into wet ground just outside the camera's view. Everett replayed those seconds with his volume higher than he liked. He listened the way a person listened for a knock when alone at home. He convinced himself at first it was an animal that stayed low. Then he noticed the pace. The steps were too measured, too evenly spaced, too close to the microphone to be incidental. He brought the camera inside and pulled the card onto his laptop. He opened the files again, slower this time. He watched the empty frame while the audio did something else entirely. The steps approached. They paused near enough to register a faint breath against the mic port, a warm, damp sound that made his scalp tighten. Then the steps retreated. Not once did anything enter the frame. No fauna captured. From the footage review, Everett was not a man who called the sheriff for odd feelings. He did not mention ghosts. He did not post clips online. He drove to the nearest ranger station the next morning with the camera unit and the SD card sealed in a sandwich bag like evidence. A ranger named Willa Hart took the complaint because she had heard every version of it. Hunters claiming lights in the timber, hikers claiming a voice off trail, landowners claiming trespassers who never left tracks. She listened to Everett's summary with professional neutrality and asked for the simple explanations first. The camera could be misconfigured. The sensor could be faulty. A prankster could be using a remote trigger. Everett handed her the event log and pointed to the timestamps. The line items marched down the page like a calendar. 2:13 a.m. every night, no deviations. Willa plugged the SD card into a workstation and pulled up the directory. The files looked normal at a glance, but the file sizes were inconsistent. Some clips had audio and video data. Others showed correct timestamps and correct naming conventions, but held almost nothing. Several files were present with a size so small they were effectively blank, as if a recording had begun and then been stripped down to an empty shell. On the workstation, the system read them as 0-byte entries. They existed as placeholders. They existed as absences. Willa called a wildlife officer to listen to the audio with proper headphones, the kind used for search recordings and dispatch review. The officer sat in a plastic chair, stared at the empty infrared frame, and let the sound play without comment until the steps began. The officer rewound once, then again, a third time. The steps came closer each replay, not louder but clearer, as if the mic had captured the texture of weight in wet ground. The breathing pause held steady, controlled, and human-adjacent without sounding like any person the officer could name. The officer leaned back and wrote a short note that tried to stay clinical. Footsteps heard near mic. From the audio analysis note, that would have been enough to file the incident under nuisance activity if the hardware had behaved normally. It did not. Everett had replaced the batteries 2 nights before the pattern began. The unit should have lasted weeks, even with heavy wildlife activity. Instead, the battery log showed accelerated drain, as if the camera was recording far more than it saved. The timestamps did not show continuous video, but the power consumption suggested the device had been awake longer than the clips indicated. Willa returned the camera with a recommendation that sounded like superstition in professional clothing. She told Everett to relocate it, to change the corridor of view and the trigger profile, to see if the pattern was tied to that specific path. Everett moved it deeper into his property, facing a different cut of timber where the ground sloped toward a creek. He chose a spot with fewer branches to eliminate false triggers. He mounted it higher to widen the field of view and set a second camera on a separate tree, angled to capture the first unit in frame, the way people did when they wanted to catch the person who kept messing with their locks. He did it carefully and during full daylight. The next night, at 2:13 a.m., both cameras triggered. The first camera recorded an empty frame and the approaching steps, the same measured pace and the same breathing pause near the mic. The second camera recorded something worse. It captured the first unit in infrared, strapped to the poplar as Everett had left it. It captured the woods behind it, and it captured a faint shift in the leaves near the camera. Not a body, not a face, but a distortion in the night that made the background bend slightly, like heat shimmer without heat. The event lasted only seconds. There was no visible intruder, no animal crossed. Yet the second camera's sensor had triggered at the exact same minute as the first, as if both devices had responded to the same invisible presence. Everett brought the cards back to the ranger station before noon. Willa reviewed the clips and noticed a detail that did not come from Everett's explanation. The timestamp on the second camera clip did not read 2:13 a.m. It read 2:12 a.m., 1 minute earlier. The cameras had been synchronized by Everett's phone clock minutes before he mounted them. The unit that faced the woods insisted it had triggered at 2:13. The unit that watched the first camera insisted it had triggered at 2:12. The discrepancy was small enough to be dismissed as clock drift. It was also consistent enough to feel like a signature. Willa escalated the issue to the county technical contractor who handled camera systems for trailheads and bridges. The contractor agreed to examine the files for corruption or editing. He pulled the raw metadata and verified that the clips had not been modified after capture. He verified that both cameras had created their files at the times they claimed. 2 different truths, recorded cleanly, separated by exactly 1 minute. The contractor offered another explanation. Infrared sensors could trigger under sudden changes in ambient temperature, like a cold pocket of air moving through. But the pattern repeated regardless of weather. Cold nights, warm nights, fog, clear, and it repeated in the same minute. Everett did not sleep well after that. He began waking before the alert. He began waiting for it, listening for the faint vibration of his phone, like a warning he could not turn off. On the 4th night, he sat at his kitchen table and watched the clock approach the minute mark. His window faced the tree line, a dark seam beyond the yard. At 2:13 a.m., his phone buzzed. He opened the clip without standing. The footage was empty, as always. The audio held the steps, as always. This time, the breathing pause lasted longer, close enough to make the mic distort slightly, as if something had leaned in. Then the steps did not retreat. They stopped, held, and stayed. The clip ended at its preset duration, but the battery drain log indicated the device remained active for much longer. The next morning, Everett found the camera still mounted, still tight, still facing the creek slope. There were no footprints. The soil was soft enough to show his own boot treads clearly, yet nothing else interrupted the surface. The tree bark around the strap showed a faint, rubbed polish, as if something had pressed close and shifted without leaving ground contact. He brought the unit down and noticed a thin smear on the housing, a clear residue like sap, except it did not smell like sap. It smelled metallic and cold, the way pennies smelled after rain. He drove the camera back to Willa without waiting for the next night. Willa logged the device as potential evidence, not because she believed in the supernatural, but because the files were now part of a pattern the station had begun to recognize. The repeating minute appeared in other reports. The 1-minute discrepancy appeared in dispatch logs. The concept was always the same: time and record-keeping drifting apart, with the drift small enough to be ignored and exact enough to be intentional. The ranger station kept the SD card and issued Everett a replacement with a new serial number. He was advised quietly to stop monitoring that section of property. Everett tried to comply for 3 nights. On the 4th night at 2:13 a.m., his phone buzzed anyway. He had uninstalled the camera app. He had removed all paired devices. Still, the notification arrived as if sent by a camera that did not exist in his account. The alert displayed a thumbnail preview, a black and white infrared still. The still was not the creek slope, it was his kitchen. The angle was low, near floor height, looking up toward the table where he sat, hands frozen above his phone, face unseen but posture unmistakable. The timestamp in the corner read 2:12 a.m. Everett did not open the file. He did not attempt to download it. He turned the phone off and left it off until daylight. When Willa later requested carrier records to verify whether the notification had been a spoofed message, the provider returned an answer that made no sense in the normal world. The push alert had originated from a device identifier matching Everett's old trail camera. The camera was in the Ranger evidence cabinet, sealed, tagged, and powered down. In the evidence folder, a printout of the event log showed one more entry that had not been there during intake. It appeared between 2 existing lines inserted as neatly as a clerical correction. 2:13 a.m. recorded no file, no duration, just a line that proved the system could still be triggered even when nothing was allowed to record. Archival transition of Appalachian legends claimed the woods learned names. In these files, the woods appeared to learn systems, then used them the way a hand used a door handle. The incident entered the county system as a welfare check, the kind that usually ended with embarrassment and relief. A day hike ran long, a phone died, a couple argued and separated on a trail, then reunited at the car with apology and cold snacks. This one began the same way. A visitor named Maren Caldwell had signed the trail register that morning with her partner, a neat 2-line entry that included their route choice and a return estimate. They were not reckless hikers. They carried water, rain shells, and a paper map folded to the correct quadrant. They had told the lodge clerk they would be back before dark. By late afternoon, Maren's partner, Reese, stopped receiving responses. At first, it felt ordinary. In the mountains, signal came and went like mood. Reese waited at the trailhead, then walked a short distance in, calling Maren's name until the sound of it made the woods feel too large. At dusk, Reese made the call. The dispatcher logged it cleanly, placed it in the correct category, and sent the nearest deputy to the trailhead while notifying volunteer searchers. Owner missing since dusk. From the emergency call record, by the time the first search group moved up the trail, the air had cooled into that sharp Appalachian night that smelled of stone and wet leaf rot. Headlamps cut short tunnels through rhododendron. The creek crossing was a known landmark, a narrow bend where the water ran clear over pale gravel, and the current stayed deceptively strong for its size. They found the crossing quickly because the trail funneled toward it. They found it the way they found all crossings, by sound first, then by the silver line of water reflecting their lights. They found the boots standing upright in the stream, 2 hiking boots positioned side by side, toes pointed downstream, heels planted in the gravel as if anchored. The water rose to midsole and flowed around them without tipping them. The placement had the careful geometry of a display. The laces were tied, not loosely, not hurriedly, not half-knotted in panic. Perfect knots, identical on both boots, symmetrical loops with equal tension. Whoever had tied them had taken time. The sight hit the searchers the same way a staged room hit responders. It told them this was not an accident. It told them the scene had been arranged. One of the volunteers, a former EMT, later described the moment with a sentence that never made it into the official file. "Those boots looked like somebody put them there to make us stop." From a volunteer statement, the deputy on scene documented the placement, the orientation, the condition. He used the language the county preferred, the kind that kept a report from sounding like fear. Footwear staged. From the scene protocol, then they searched for the missing things that should have been there. Footprints. The creek bank was soft enough to hold impressions. Mud at the edge, damp sand above the gravel. If Marin had stepped into the water, her prints would have registered. If someone had carried the boots, there would have been weight marks, slides, scuffs. If someone had struggled, the bank would have shown it like a confession. There were none. The banks were smooth, undisturbed, as if the stream had been untouched all day. Only the searchers' new prints began to appear, and even those looked too crisp, too temporary. A responding ranger photographed both banks and wrote a line that felt incomplete, even to him. No bank prints. From the site inspection, they pulled the boots from the water carefully, expecting them to be heavy with soaked lining and grit. The exterior leather was wet, but the laces above the knot were dry, as if the waterline had never risen that high, or as if the boots had been placed moments before they were found. The knots held their shape with stubborn consistency. The loops did not sag. The bows did not slip. The deputy checked inside each boot for anything that might explain the absence of tracks. There was no foot inside, no sock, no tissue, no debris that suggested a fall and recovery. The insoles were intact. The toe boxes held only a faint warmth that could have been imagined in a cold night. Except 2 different searchers noted it separately without prompting. The deputy did not put that in the report. The boots were tagged and bagged, then carried up to the trailhead for proper chain of custody. A second team widened the search radius, moving upstream and downstream, scanning for a pack, a jacket, a broken branch, anything that indicated a human path. The creek gave them nothing. No scuff marks on rocks, no displaced gravel, no snagged fabric on roots. The current ran clean and constant, as if it had been running without interruption. Reese was brought in for a statement in the early hours after midnight. Reese described the last confirmed contact, a short text sent before the signal dropped. It contained nothing dramatic, nothing that sounded like final words. It was the kind of message people sent when they believed they would be home soon. Reese's hand shook as the deputy asked about footwear size and brand. Reese described the boots without looking at a photo down to the worn edge on the left heel. When the deputy set the evidence bag on the table, Reese's face tightened in a way the deputy recognized from families who saw proof before they saw explanation. Reese's only clear sentence was simple and final. She wouldn't take them off and leave them like that. From Reese Caldwell's statement, the county sent the laces for comparison because the knots were the only thing that felt like intent. A lab tech noted the knot style in a way that sounded almost amused at first, until she found the matching reference. It was a looped pattern, precise and mirrored, with an extra wrap that prevented slippage. a knot taught in certain outdoor programs, a knot also appearing in an older file from a neighboring county, a separate creek, a separate missing hiker years apart, the same symmetrical bow. The lab could not prove the same person tied them. The lab could only confirm that the pattern was uncommon enough to be notable and specific enough to be repeated. The case file gained a quiet appendix, a cross-reference, a phrase that looked bureaucratic but felt like a whisper. Reese returned to the lodge that morning to collect their belongings. The manager allowed early checkout without argument. The room smelled like damp wool and pine cleaner. The bed was unmade. Marin's jacket still hung on the chair, but her pack was missing, her keys missing, her phone missing. Reese found something else while packing. In the pocket of Marin's trail pants, folded so small it looked like trash, there was a strip of paper torn from a check-in ledger. The paper was thick and fibrous, the kind lodges used for handwritten records. It had a partial line of ink on it, a fragment of a signature, and a date that had been written as words. The strip was spotted with moisture that did not dry. Even in warm air, the paper remained faintly damp, as if it carried the creek with it. The manager did not recognize the paper. The lodge used a different system for its own check-ins. The deputy who collected the strip recognized the format anyway because he had seen a photocopy of it in another file. The lodge reservation under the missing name had occurred months earlier. Different family, different clerk, same style of ledger paper. The strip was bagged as secondary evidence and stored with the boots. 2 days later, a volunteer returned to the creek crossing with a measuring tape and a notebook, trying to make the scene fit into normal physics. He measured depth, current speed, distance between banks. He wanted to understand how boots could stand like that without anchoring. He did not find anchors. He did find a detail that made his stomach drop. On a flat stone near the waterline, where the current had polished the surface smooth, there were faint abrasion marks. Not scratches in random directions, but 2 short parallel lines repeated 3 times, like a small object had been set down and lifted repeatedly. 3 marks. A pause of clean stone. 3 marks again. He photographed them and sent the images to the deputy. The deputy added them to the file without comment because the pattern was beginning to appear everywhere in the county's strange cases, and no one wanted to be the first to name it. Marin Caldwell was never located. The official conclusion stayed open, held in that suspended language that implied hope while acknowledging absence. But the evidence shelf in the county locker told a different story. 2 boots perfectly knotted and a damp strip of ledger paper that should not have been in a hiker's pocket. In later months, when a technician reviewed older dashcam audio from another case, he noted a faint sound in the background that did not belong to wind or water, a soft, steady exhale that lasted exactly 1 minute, then cut clean as if someone had stopped breathing on command. It was filed as incidental audio artifact. It was also time-stamped to the same repeating minute, archival transition across. Appalachian case files, the objects did not remain isolated. They migrated between incidents, as if someone was building a record out of physical proofs, one careful placement at a time. The tower had been built for an older kind of emergency. Before satellites and apps, before statewide networks, a human being sat above the ridgeline and watched the mountains like a living sensor. The job demanded boredom, precision, and a willingness to be alone for long stretches without making that loneliness everyone else's problem. The county treated the lookout system as legacy infrastructure, but it still worked. Each tower had an assigned radio identifier, a call sign that routed through the dispatch console automatically. Each tower had a staff logbook kept in a metal drawer and a lock procedure that made sure the person inside could secure the door from within. In early spring, when the trees were still thin and the wind moved like cold water, the dispatch center received a transmission from Tower 12. It came in as a clean, controlled key-up on the correct frequency, with the correct identifier showing on the console display. Not a garbled bleed from a neighboring county, not a random burst, a deliberate call. Call received from tower identifier. From the dispatch log, the dispatcher on duty, Lena Hart, treated it as equipment behavior at first. Radios could stick, microphones could short. A loose cord could rest against a transmit button. She marked the time on the incident scratch pad and listened for a voice. There was no voice. There was only the carrier tone and the faintest texture beneath it, like something clicking softly at a steady interval. Lena attempted a standard return call to confirm status. The channel opened, then closed. Opened again, then closed again, with the same measured timing. It did not sound like a failure. It sounded like someone tapping the line to demonstrate control. The supervisor checked the staff schedule and the station register the way supervisors always did when something didn't match a screen display. He wanted a boring explanation he could document. There wasn't one. Tower 12 had been taken off staffing rotation for maintenance pending a cable inspection. No one was assigned. No one had signed in. No one had called in sick. No one had swapped. No one had requested overtime. No staff signed in. From the station register, the supervisor called the maintenance coordinator. The maintenance coordinator confirmed the same thing twice, slower the second time, as if repetition could force sense into it. The tower should have been empty. The dispatch center pulled the prior week's logs. Tower 12 had been silent. No routine check-ins, no test keys. The tower had behaved like an unoccupied tower until it didn't. Lena replayed the incoming audio through the console monitor. The carrier tone remained clean. Beneath it, the clicking was still there. Not random, not wind, not electrical chatter. A rhythm. In the minute that followed, the tower keyed up again. Same identifier. Same frequency, same calm repetition. The supervisor made the decision that always came with the same mixture of annoyance and unease. He sent a deputy to do a physical check. He also notified the volunteer fire chief, who oversaw lookout coordination, because the only thing worse than a mystery was a mystery that might become a rescue. The deputy, Travis Keene, reached the access road after midnight. The climb was steep enough that the cruiser had to idle in low gear, tires grinding over gravel slick with spring damp. The forest looked unfinished, branches still bare in places, shadows thin and sharp. As he drove, his cruiser radio picked up the tower transmission again, faint but unmistakable. The signal strength rose as he gained elevation, confirming the source in the simplest way. It was coming from the tower. Travis parked below the last switchback and walked the remaining distance because the final stretch was rutted and the shoulder dropped into brush. His boots sounded loud on the gravel. The tower rose out of the trees like a stiff black line against a moonlit cloud layer, its windows dark, its platform empty. The structure looked normal. The feeling did not. He circled once, scanning for vehicles. There were none. He checked for footprints near the base where the soil held impressions easily. He found only his own fresh tracks and older animal prints from the day before. The door sat where it always sat, metal and plain with its locks intact. Travis tried the handle. It did not move. He leaned in with his flashlight, examining the latch hardware. The tower door had a design meant to keep people safe inside during lightning and wind. It also made the latch difficult to manipulate from outside. Travis used the correct key. The exterior lock disengaged. The door still would not open. He applied steady pressure, listening for movement. Nothing. He looked through the narrow seam where door met frame and saw the internal latch in the secured position, angled down in a way that indicated it had been set by a hand inside. He documented it with photos because this was the kind of detail that mattered later. Door secured. From the deputy report, Travis called dispatch. with a controlled voice and described the problem. His tone stayed procedural because that was how professionals kept their fear from becoming contagious. He requested maintenance response for forced entry protocol because breaking into a tower without authorization created its own liability. Dispatch told him maintenance was en route. While he waited, Tower 12 keyed up again. This time, the transmission held for longer. The carrier tone filled his cruiser speaker. Travis listened through the open car window, then turned down the volume and listened with his own ears. The sound existed on both levels. From the radio, the faint rhythmic click repeated under the tone. From the tower itself, Travis thought he heard something else, not loud enough to define, but consistent enough to feel like a presence behind the walls. Not a voice. A cadence. Travis started recording on his body camera because he wanted the truth to exist outside of memory. He approached the door again and pressed his gloved palm flat to the metal. It felt faintly warm, as if the tower had been occupied recently, or as if power had been running longer than it should. The radio inside keyed again, then released. A few seconds later, it keyed again. The pattern was not frantic, it was controlled, as if an operator were intentionally avoiding speech. Travis backed away and watched the windows. He expected movement. He expected silhouette. He expected the simplest wrong thing, like a squatter, a bored teenager, a drunk who had climbed and locked himself in. Nothing moved. The maintenance truck arrived near the base of the tower with 2 technicians and a fire chief, Martin Rusk, who did not like mysteries and liked paperwork even less. Martin checked Travis's photos, checked the latch through the seam, then told the technicians to proceed. They followed procedure. Document locks, document door condition, attempt bypass without damage, escalate only if necessary. The first attempt failed. The second failed. The third required a tool that would leave a mark, no matter how careful they were. Martin authorized it because a secured from inside door on an unstaffed tower meant one of 2 things. Either someone was inside and incapable of opening it, or someone wanted the door to be read as a warning. They forced entry with controlled pressure. The latch released with a sound like a breath being interrupted. The door swung inward. The tower was empty. The interior smelled of dust and stale coffee and the metallic cold of unheated equipment. The desk sat where it always sat. The cot was made in the simple, tight way towers kept them. The observation windows were clean enough to reflect flashlight beams. The radio sat on the desk, powered on, volume low, the indicator light steady. There was no operator. There was no sleeping bag. There were no food wrappers, no water jugs, no sign of an unauthorized stay. Travis moved directly to the radio to check the transmit button. It was clean, not worn, not smudged. The microphone cord lay in a loose loop, not pulled, not stretched, not trapped under anything that could have keyed it. The technicians checked the wiring for shorts. They checked the desk for vibration triggers. They checked the power supply for irregular cycling. The radio behaved normally under test. Then it keyed up by itself once on the open room channel. The indicator light flashed. The carrier tone filled the room. The rhythmic clicking sounded clearer in the enclosed space, and now it did not feel like static. It felt like a deliberate signal layered under the broadcast. Martin ordered the radio powered down. Powered. The moment the power switch clicked off, the tower went quiet in a way that felt immediate and heavy, as if the building had been holding a sound and had just decided to stop. They documented everything. They searched the tower's small storage. They checked the stairwell for hidden access points. They checked the windows for tampering. They found nothing that explained an inside latch, a keyed transmission, and an empty platform. Only the logbook in the desk drawer offered anything resembling a human trace. The book should have been blank for that day. It was not. A single line had been written in pencil, pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page beneath. The date was correct, written as words in the format the county used. The time was written wrong by exactly 1 minute, the kind of error that seemed too consistent to be accidental once you had seen it in other files. The line did not contain a name. It contained a simple operational statement, written like a checklist item, channel verified. The handwriting did not match any assigned staff. It did not match Martin Rusk. It did not match Lena Hart. It did not match Deputy Travis Keene. It matched no one they could identify. The logbook was bagged as evidence. The radio audio was archived. The latch photos were attached to the report. The tower was placed under temporary closure. At dawn, when Lena returned to dispatch for her next shift, she listened to the recovered tower audio again with fresh ears and an exhausted mind. Under the carrier tone beneath the clicking, there was a sound so faint it could be missed if you were not looking for patterns. A breath, a steady exhale that lasted almost a full minute, then cut clean as if someone had stopped when they realized they were being listened to. Lena wrote a private memo on her phone because she already knew what the official report would say. Equipment anomaly, possible interference, no confirmed operator. Her memo was shorter and more honest than anything the county would ever file. It keyed like someone holding the line open, waiting for us to answer. From Lena Hart's voice, memo, the tower remained empty. The transmission stopped for several weeks. Then, on a night when fog sat low over the ridges and the wind carried sound farther than it should, the dispatch console received a single brief key-up from Tower 12 at a time when the maintenance lock was still in place. No voice, just the identifier, clean and certain, like a hand tapping the glass from the other side. Archival transition in Appalachia, the towers were meant to watch the forest. In these files, it looked like something in the forest had learned to watch back through the same system. The call came in the way winter calls often did in the Appalachian counties, vague, half-apologetic, delivered by someone who did not want to waste law enforcement time but could not ignore what they had seen. A local hunter reported steam rising from a hillside above an abandoned cut road. The description included a landmark most residents still used out of habit, even though the mine itself had been sealed before many of them were born. The county map listed it as inactive. The archive listed it as closed. The hillside should have been dead and cold, locked under snow and old warnings. Deputy Aaron Rigsby drove out just after dusk. The temperature sat well below freezing. His cruiser heater worked hard enough to dry his eyes. The road up was hard-packed snow patched with gravel, and the woods looked stripped down to structure, every tree branch black against a low sky. He parked where the plow stopped and continued on foot, carrying a handheld thermal unit and a small evidence kit, because the department had learned to treat unusual reports like potential hazards, gas pockets, hidden fires, illegal dumps. People were creative when they were desperate. The mine gate appeared through the trees like a mouth bolted shut. It was a welded steel barrier set into a rough stone opening. The warning signs were still there but faded, the red paint bruised into rust tones. Snow lay hard across the slope, unbroken except for deer tracks that had cut sideways through the understory. Aaron stopped at a distance first because old mines were not only dangerous for the obvious reasons, they were dangerous because the ground had ways of failing quietly. That was when he felt it. Not cold, which was what he expected. Not wind, which would have moved the branches. Warmth, it came from the gate in a steady stream, humid enough to carry a faint sheen into the air. The warmth was not gentle. It had a wet pressure to it, like a basement breath, carrying minerals and something metallic that stung the back of the throat. Aaron lifted his gloved hand toward the bars and held it there until his skin began to register the difference. He stepped closer and saw the steam as a thin, persistent fog pushing outward, spreading and flattening into the winter air before vanishing. He turned on his field recorder without thinking. because the sensation did not match any normal explanation his brain offered. Warm airflow detected. From the field report, he checked the ground at the base of the gate for signs of recent disturbance. There were no boot prints, no drag marks, no fresh weld shine. The snow remained hard and unbroken, crisp enough that even a small animal would have left a clear imprint. The warmth continued anyway. Aaron raised the thermal unit and aimed it at the opening. The screen bloomed with a soft heat signature that did not belong in that landscape. The gate itself stayed cold, a darker outline, but behind it, pressed against the bars, the thermal image showed a plume of warmth rolling outward in slow layers. It did not look like heat rising from an engine or an electrical box. It looked like respiration, a steady expansion, a slow release, a pause, another expansion. The thermal unit time-stamped the clip and stored it. Aaron watched the pattern repeat long enough for his pulse to slow and his doubt to start working again. The rational mind always arrived late, carrying tools and excuses. He radioed dispatch with the cautious language used for potential environmental hazards. He requested the fire department's thermal camera team and asked for the county's mine file pulled from archives, because if there was an unknown vent line, a sinkhole, or underground combustion, it needed to be handled properly. He kept his voice professional, but his body did not match that professionalism. His throat tightened in a way he could not explain. The mineral smell intensified briefly, then faded again as if the hillside had adjusted. The thermal plume continued. Thermal camera shows plume. From the thermal clip review, back at the station, the duty sergeant pulled the mine closure records. The original paperwork described the ceiling in the language of old bureaucracy. Welded gate, signage installed, shaft stabilized, no active power, no ventilation. A note from the county archive stated it plainly. The mine had been sealed for decades. There was no authorized access. There was no legal reason for anything down there to be warm. Mine sealed decades ago. From the county archive note, 2 hours later, a second team arrived. One fire captain with a larger thermal camera, an older deputy who remembered the mine's last days, and a county safety inspector who spoke in probabilities and liability. They stood at the same spot Aaron had stood and pointed their equipment at the gate. The hillside was cold, the air was dry, the steam was gone. The thermal camera displayed only winter. Uniform cold stone, cold steel, cold snow. No heat signature, no plume, no pressure. Aaron felt the humiliation of that moment first, the way professionals did when reality made them look unreliable. Then he felt something else, a quieter embarrassment, like being caught reacting emotionally to a thing that had learned to behave differently when observed. The inspector checked for natural explanations anyway. He examined the gate welds and found them intact. He measured ambient temperature and humidity and found nothing unusual. He scanned for hidden vents. Nothing. The older deputy crouched by the base of the opening and pointed at a thin line in the snow that looked like a melt mark. Not enough to form liquid, but enough to show that heat had existed there recently. It ran in a narrow curve, then stopped. The team made notes. They took photos. They recorded readings that described a normal winter hillside. Aaron did not argue. He did not dramatize. He simply retrieved his earlier thermal clip and showed it on his handheld screen. The fire captain watched the video twice. The second time, he leaned closer. For most of the clip, the plume looked like warm humidity spreading outward. Then, for a brief instant, the heat signature formed a shape within it that did not resemble random turbulence. A narrow vertical void appeared inside the plume, like a corridor of colder air cutting through warmth. A clean negative space aligned straight back into the hillside. It opened. It held for less than a second. Then the warm pattern shifted and the void collapsed as if a door had closed. Aaron exported the frame later and printed it for evidence. On paper, the shape looked even more deliberate, because paper froze ambiguity into a single moment that could be stared at too long. The team returned the next morning at first light to inspect again, hoping to catch the phenomenon while conditions were stable. They found the gate cold, the air dry, the snow intact. No heat, no plume. No corridor, only the smell remained faintly in the stone, the kind of mineral damp that should not exist in a sealed opening in midwinter. Aaron filed the thermal clip as an anomaly and attached it to a report that would be read, skimmed, and eventually buried under more urgent work. He kept a private note on his phone in the same clipped language he used for patrol logs, because he had learned that certain details vanished if they were only spoken. It behaved like it noticed the second camera, from Aaron Rigsby's personal note. In the weeks that followed, the county received 2 more calls about the same hillside. One described fog. One described warmth you could feel from the road. When deputies responded, they found nothing each time. The mine remained sealed. The warning signs remained rusted and polite. The snow remained unbroken, but the evidence file kept one stubborn artifact: a thermal clip with a plume that moved like breath, and a single frame where the mountain seemed to open a narrow corridor and then close it again, as if the ground had exhaled and decided it did not like being watched. Archival transition: some Appalachian records ended with a missing person. Others ended with a brief opening in the earth that left no footprints, no explanation, and no reason to believe it would not happen again. The call entered the county system at a time when most dispatch centers shifted into their quieter rhythm. The overnight screen showed fewer active units, fewer traffic stops, fewer routine complaints. The mountain counties did not sleep, but they did thin out, leaving long stretches of radio silence between the predictable bursts of need. The caller was a tourist named Lila Markham, her number registered as out of state. Her GPS coordinates arrived with the call in a loose radius rather than a fixed pin, the kind of uncertainty that happened in the folds of terrain where signal bounced off rock and tree cover like a poor decision. Her first words were the familiar pattern dispatchers heard every week in those hills: breath scraping, a tight voice, the attempt to sound reasonable while fear pressed down on her ribs. She gave her location as best she could. She described a trail spur that was not on her printed map, but had a small wooden marker nailed to a tree. She described fog that had moved in too quickly and a sound behind her that did not match any animal she knew. The dispatcher followed protocol: name, callback number, medical condition, exact trailhead, last known landmark. The questions were standard. The answers were not. The audio recording would have been filed as routine until the supervisor reviewed it later and noticed a second layer riding beneath Lila's speech. It was not an echo. It was not a delayed repeat. It moved at the same speed as the caller's syllables, tracking her phrasing in real time, as if someone had learned how to place their mouth over her words. When Lila said a sentence, the second voice said it with her, slightly offset in tone, not louder, not softer, but present in the spaces where human speech normally carried only breath. It was not trying to interrupt. It was trying to match. The dispatch center's automatic filter flagged the recording as potential interference. The supervisor pulled the raw file and listened through studio headphones. The overlap became clearer with every replay. The second voice repeated Lila's phrases on the same beat, like a shadow that had memorized her cadence. Secondary voice overlap. From the audio analysis summary, Lila's panic increased in waves. She described seeing her own headlamp beam cut across the same tree twice. She described a turn that returned her to a fallen log she had already stepped over. Her voice tightened with the pressure of a person realizing the map in their head no longer matched the ground. The dispatcher instructed her to stop moving, to conserve battery, to stay visible, to keep the line open. The dispatcher's voice was calm, practiced, stripped of emotion to prevent escalation. Lila's responses were fast, repetitive, a loop of reassurances and fear. Under them, the second voice continued to copy. It did not add new words. It did not speak first. It simply rehearsed her phrases as she produced them, syllable by syllable, with the unsettling patience of a mechanism. The system clock printed a timestamp at the top of the file. Later, when the report was created, the supervisor noticed an error that did not have a simple explanation. The call was logged at a minute that did not match the center's synchronized time. The start time was wrong by exactly 1 minute. The call lasted several minutes. The final log line ended on a minute that should not have existed according to the dispatch server's internal record, as if the file had been placed into the timeline with a slight, deliberate misalignment. A deputy and a volunteer searcher were dispatched to the closest trailhead. They reached the spur after midnight. Their body cameras recorded cold air, wet leaf litter, and the shine of fog in their lights. They called out for the tourist in the standard cadence used to locate lost hikers. They found her exactly where the coordinates suggested she might be, near a tree with a hand-painted marker, crouched on a rock to keep her boots out of damp ground. Her hands shook. Her cheeks were pale with cold. Her phone was in her pocket, still connected, screen dimmed, battery nearly depleted. There was no one else. No second set of tracks approached. No tracks left. The soft soil and wet moss held only the prints of the responders and the caller's own movement around a small circle of ground. The deputy checked for signs of another person hiding nearby. The fog limited visibility, but the lack of sound made the search worse. No brush movement, no distant footsteps, no animal noise, just the steady drip of condensation from branches. The responder report documented the simplest, most unsettling detail. The caller had been alone, and yet the call carried a second voice that behaved like an imitation. Caller found alone. From the responder report back at the dispatch center, the supervisor treated the recording like contaminated evidence. The file was duplicated and sealed under a restricted access note. The center's technical contractor was asked to analyze the audio for common explanations: open mic feedback, cross-channel bleed, VoIP compression artifacts, digital echo cancellation errors. The contractor produced a cautious summary. The overlap voice was too synchronized to be echo. It was too clean to be random bleed. It contained consonants that did not match Lila's exact pronunciation, suggesting it was not a simple replay of the same signal. The waveform showed two distinct voices occupying the same timeline. The supervisor then did what experienced dispatchers did when something did not fit. She searched older records. The county had access to a shared archive system for multi-jurisdiction review. She filtered for flagged anomalies, interference tags, and calls from dead zones. She expanded the search beyond her county. She included older years. She included files that had been reviewed once and then forgotten. She found a match. It was an emergency call from another Appalachian county years earlier, filed under a missing hiker incident that had ended without recovery. The audio contained the same overlap pattern, a second voice tracking the caller phrase for phrase, not ahead, not behind, but alongside. It was also mis-timestamped by exactly 1 minute compared to the system record. The phenomenon was not unique to one dispatcher. It was not tied to one phone. It had been recorded in 2 separate counties years apart, with the same timing defect and the same behavior of imitation rather than interruption. Same phenomenon in other call. From the Emergency Archive Review, the supervisor marked the file with a time code and handed it to a state-level communications tech who had the equipment to isolate layers more precisely. The tech separated the overlap track from the primary voice as far as the audio allowed. The result was thin and incomplete, like a ghost of speech, but it retained structure. And inside that structure, the overlap voice did something it had not done on the main recording. It tested a phrase that Lila had not spoken into the phone. It said a lodge name softly, the way a person tried a word in their mouth before using it in conversation. The name appeared in the overlap track with a careful cadence, as if the voice wanted to see whether the system would accept it. The supervisor recognized the lodge name because it had circulated in the region's quieter law enforcement discussions, tied to an earlier file that had never sat right with anyone who handled evidence. A reservation ledger had once accepted a booking under the name of a missing person. The paper had behaved like a lure. Now the audio did something similar. The system stored the file with the time code marker, and the county treated it like hazardous material, something that could not be thrown away and could not be safely understood. Lila went home. She gave a statement. She described hearing her own voice in the trees after the responders arrived, faint and wrong, like a recording played through wet cloth. She did not give that detail in the official report. She wrote it on a separate sheet and asked the deputy to keep it out of public records. The deputy did because the deputy had listened to the call and could not unhear the second voice learning the shape of a human mouth. The last entry in the evidence chain was the storage confirmation. The file was archived, the metadata was checked, the time error remained. The supervisor later noticed something else in the export log. When the tech generated the isolated overlap track, the system created a duplicate file name with an extra character added at the end. A subtle corruption that read like a typo, except it repeated across both counties' files. 2 incidents, 2 audio overlaps, 2-minute errors, 2 corrupted exports, a pattern that behaved less like interference and more like a signature. Outre 9 case files, 9 different entry points into the same mountain logic, paperwork that behaved like a lure, images that arrived without a source, cameras that erased what they should have captured, a bridge that refused to document identity, a sealed mind that exhaled warmth as if the ground itself were alive. And finally, the most unsettling shift of all, the emergency system, the last resort people trusted when the dark got too close, answering in a voice that tried to become yours. If this episode stayed with you, write which case hit the hardest and what detail you cannot stop thinking about. Subscribe to Black Pine Archives for the next file. Some patterns did not end. They simply moved to the next signal.